You're standing in the center of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. The air is cool. It smells of aged stone and something older than incense. You look up at the portal of paradise on the western facade, expecting saints, martyrs, the usual. But then you stop. You lean in closer. There, carved into the stone in the 1980s, is a scene that shouldn't exist in a house of God. The New York City skyline, the Twin Towers, the Chrysler Building, being swallowed by a massive tidal wave. Not a biblical flood from 4,000 years ago. Your world, being erased. Most people see that and think, artistic statement, modern commentary, a progressive church making a point about climate change. That's what they told you. Here's what they didn't tell you. The imagery in the book of Revelation doesn't originate in the 1st century. It doesn't even originate in Judaism. When you trace its symbols backward, through Babylonian star charts, through Sumerian cosmological texts, through Akkadian astronomical records that predate Moses by 2,000 years, you find something mainstream biblical scholarship has been quietly uncomfortable with for decades. Revelation isn't prophecy about the future. It may be memory of the past. And the terrifying part isn't the beasts or the trumpets or the lake of fire. The terrifying part is how many times this has all happened before. The symbol that shouldn't be there. Revelation chapter 12. A woman clothed in the sun, standing on the moon, with a crown of 12 stars. She's in labor. A great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns stands before her, waiting to devour the child the moment it's born. In 1977, researcher David Talbot published a study on ancient mythological imagery. He wasn't a biblical scholar. He was tracing a specific recurring symbol across unconnected ancient cultures. The image of a celestial woman giving birth in the sky, while a draconic figure threatens the child. What he found was that this image appears in Babylonian mythology as Tiamat and Marduk, in Vedic cosmology as Vritra and Indra, in Egyptian religion as a pep threatening the solar child, in Greek mythology as the dragon Python pursuing Leto before she gives birth to Apollo. The mainstream explanation is Jungian, universal archetypes. Human minds across cultures naturally producing similar imagery because the mother-child predator dynamic is hardwired. But here's the problem with that explanation. The Babylonian version doesn't just share the general shape, it shares specific details. 7 heads, a tail that sweeps 1/3 of the stars from the sky, a child snatched away to be hidden, the woman fleeing into wilderness. These aren't general archetypes, they're operational specifics, and they appear in the Enuma Elish, written around 1700 BCE, over 1,000 years before John wrote Revelation on Patmos. Either John borrowed this imagery consciously, which mainstream scholarship acknowledges, or both sources were drawing from something even older. Something the Babylonians and the 1st century Christians both inherited without fully understanding what they were describing. What if the dragon isn't metaphor? What if it's memory? I want to slow down here because this next part is the reason the whole video exists. In 2010, plasma physicist Anthony Peratt published a peer-reviewed paper in IEEE Transactions on Plasma Physics, not a fringe journal, the flagship publication of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, documenting over 40,000 petroglyphs carved across every inhabited continent. The imagery was consistent. Columns of stacked disks, figures radiating light, concentric rings, spiraling filaments descending from a central point above the horizon. Peratt's analysis was technical. He identified the imagery as consistent with the visual appearance of plasma instabilities in an intense electromagnetic field, the kind of display a population would witness if Earth passed through a massive electromagnetic event in the ancient sky. This matters for Revelation because Revelation's imagery is full of light phenomena descriptions that don't match natural weather. Lightning coming from a throne, 7 lampstands burning, a sea of glass mixed with fire, a new heaven with no sun, no moon, because the light itself has changed its fundamental source. These aren't theological flourishes, they're phenomenological descriptions, someone trying to describe a sky that looked different. Comparative mythologist Ev Cochrane documented in Martian Metamorphoses in 1997 that across Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, Norse, and Vedic traditions, the ancient sky was described as containing a polar configuration, a column of light connecting the celestial pole to Earth, visible to ancient populations before the planetary order we now inhabit was established. The Sumerians called it the Mi, the Egyptians called it the Jed Pillar, the Norse called it Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting heaven and earth. In Revelation chapter 1, John sees the Son of Man standing in the center of 7 lampstands, his face shining like the sun in full strength, his feet like burnished bronze, his voice like the sound of many waters. The pre-Christian world would have read that and recognized a specific celestial description, not a man, a configuration, a polar light phenomenon seen from below. What John may have been describing, encoded in theological language because that was the only language available, was the ancient sky restored, the catastrophe reversed, the configuration returned. That's not a metaphor for social justice. That's a cosmological memory of what the sky used to look like. I can already see the comment someone is typing right now. This is ancient astronaut territory, fringe pseudoscience dressed in academic language. I thought the same thing when I first found Peratt's paper. So I looked up his credentials. Emeritus Professor at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Former Visiting Associate at Caltech. His peer-reviewed publication list spans decades of legitimate plasma physics research. He didn't start as a mythologist with a theory to sell. He started as a plasma physicist who noticed ancient art was depicting plasma configurations too accurately to be coincidence. That's a different kind of witness. Revelation chapter 6. The first seal is opened, a rider on a white horse. The second, war. Third, famine. Fourth, death, given authority over a quarter of the earth by sword, by famine, by pestilence, by wild beasts. Conquest, organized violence, food system collapse, mass death across a quarter of the known population. Then the fifth seal, those who were slaughtered crying out from beneath the altar, how long before justice? This sequence maps, in uncomfortable specificity, onto what geologists and climatologists now understand about the Younger Dryas impact event approximately 12,800 years ago. A comet or cometary fragment struck Earth's ice sheet. The resulting fires, dust, and particulate matter triggered what researchers including Randall Carlson and the published findings of the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis Working Group have documented: instant temperature collapse, megafaunal extinction, agricultural disruption across the northern hemisphere, population die-off. In 2018, the journal Scientific Reports published a paper by the YDB Impact Hypothesis team documenting physical evidence of a cosmic airburst at Abu Huraira in Syria, dated to approximately 12,800 years ago. The same site, by the way, where early agriculture had just begun. Wiped out at the exact moment humanity was starting to build something. Conquest, war, famine, death. A quarter of the population, followed by survivors asking, how long before justice? That's not a theological sequence invented in the 1st century. That's a geological event sequence encoded in mythological language and passed down through cultures that experienced it and couldn't explain it any other way except something in the heavens opened and poured disaster onto the earth. John wasn't predicting it, he was remembering it. Now here's where it gets strange. And I mean strange in the most specific sense. Most people ignore the geometry of the buildings themselves. They walk past the octagonal baptistries and the 12-pillared naves, thinking it's just architectural tradition. They're wrong. Take Chartres Cathedral in France. Mainstream historians say it was built in the 12th century as a monument to the Virgin Mary. But here's where the numbers stop making sense for a group of medieval monks. The distance between the altar of Chartres and the altar of Notre Dame in Paris is exactly 1/1000th of the Earth's polar radius. Let that sit for a second. To achieve that level of precision in the 1100s, you would need longitude data equivalent to what we found in the Piri-Reis map and the Ahmed map. You would need to know the exact circumference of the Earth, a figure that wouldn't be officially recalculated to that accuracy for another 600 years. The building isn't just a church. It's a geodetic marker, a stake driven into the ground that says, this is exactly where we are on the sphere. Remember this when the poles move. In 2014, a team of acoustic engineers from the University of Salford documented something else. The resonant frequency of the oldest foundation stones in major European cathedrals, the pre-Romanesque courses, the layers below the medieval construction, vibrated consistently at 111 Hz. Behavioral science identifies this as an acoustic window that suppresses the language center of the brain and triggers a state of deep receptivity. Why would a church need to deactivate your ability to speak? Because the information being transmitted isn't for your conscious mind. It's for something older than that. I was sitting in a small chapel in rural France, just killing time between research stops, not even thinking about the video, and it clicked. I looked at the doom paintings on the wall, the sun turning black like sackcloth, the moon becoming like blood. I put my coffee down. I realized I wasn't looking at a religious vision. I was looking at an eyewitness report, not of the future, of the last time. If you're half listening to this while doing something else, I need you to actually look at the screen for a moment. Because this is the piece that makes everything else I've said make sense. Every significant church of Revelation contains a crypt. In modern times, we're told these are burial chambers for saints. But look at the construction of the crypt at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. It isn't built like a tomb. The walls use massive, high-density blocks of mineral-rich stone, isolated by layers of non-conductive clay. The proportions and materials are consistent with what engineers today would call a Faraday cage, a structure that redirects electromagnetic charge around its interior rather than through it. During a solar micronova or magnetic reversal, the atmosphere becomes a plasma environment. If you are standing on the surface, you are a lightning rod. If you are inside a structure built to these specifications, you are grounded. The church isn't a place to meet God. It may have been designed as a place to survive the sun. I'll be honest, when I started writing the notes for this video, I was going to tell you that the strange features of these buildings were about hidden treasure, Templar gold, secret documents. But at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, I found a declassified 1966 CIA document titled The Adam and Eve Story by Chan Thomas, partially declassified in 2013, the rest still redacted. It describes Earth's crust periodically slipping over its core, not as theory, as mechanism, and the structures built with the mass and the orientation to function as geodetic markers after a crustal displacement, to tell survivors where New North is. They look exactly like cathedrals. That forced me to realize I'd been starting from the wrong question. I was asking, what are they hiding inside these buildings? The real question is, who did they build these buildings for? Not for the people who commissioned them, for whoever crawls out after. This is the part most people stop at, so let me give you what you stayed for. Revelation ends with a city descending from heaven, New Jerusalem, walls of jasper, gates of pearl, a river of the water of life flowing through it. No temple in the city because the presence itself is everywhere. No sun needed because the light is inherent. This isn't Christian invention. The Sumerians had a city of the gods called Eridu, associated with the cosmic pillar and divine luminosity of the polar configuration. The Egyptians had Heliopolis. The Vedic tradition had Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of the world where heaven and earth were once directly connected. Every ancient tradition has a version of what was lost, a golden age, a time when the heavens were different and closer, and the communication between above and below was unbroken. And every one of those traditions has a version of what shattered it. A war in heaven, a great serpent, a flood, a fire from above, the violent severing of the connection. Revelation is the tradition that says the severing is not permanent. The city comes back, the configuration returns, the river flows again. Mainstream theology reads this as eschatological promise, the end of history, God restoring what sin destroyed. The ancient sky reading says something different. It says, this is cyclical. It has happened. It was broken. The cycle is longer than a human lifetime, longer than recorded history, but the cycle exists. And the text is a warning, encoded in the only language the survivors had, passed through a dozen cultures and a dozen translations, arriving in John's hands as revelation, arriving in your hands right now as a video that cannot give you the clean answer you wanted, because there isn't one. I almost wish I hadn't found this. Because once you understand what these buildings were actually for, Once you see the crypt as a Faraday cage, the nave proportions as geodetic data, the doom paintings as eyewitness records, you can't go back to the version where Sunday service is just about being a good person. You're stuck with the weight of the stone now, just like I am. There's a church in Lalibela, Ethiopia, carved directly into the bedrock, the entire structure a single piece of stone. In the basement of that church, there is a door that has not been opened for 800 years. The locals say it doesn't open until the sun stays in the east for 3 days. The Vatican is currently funding a seismic survey of the Lalibela bedrock. I don't know where you're watching this. Maybe it's late. Maybe you're supposed to be doing something else right now. But if you've made it this far, I think you already know why that door matters. The question isn't what's behind it. The question is, what does the Vatican know about when it opens? If you're someone whose relationship with history is serious enough to follow evidence where it actually leads, not where it's comfortable to go, this channel doesn't offer clean conclusions. What it offers is the specific, uncomfortable satisfaction of being the person in the room who noticed the thing everyone else walked past. Subscribe so you're here when we go deeper. Save this video, not because I asked you to, because the next time someone tells you Revelation is either literal prophecy or primitive mythology, you'll want to remember what a third option looks like. The Sumerian astronomical compendium called the Muldat Apin, dated to around 1000 BCE, but based on observations scholars trace back to 2300 BCE, contains star groupings and planetary configurations that appear to describe the pre-catastrophe sky directly. What that text shares with Revelation's imagery is not a small overlap. That's where this goes next, and the connection is not what you're expecting. The video is right here when you're ready. What I can't resolve, sitting here having spent months with this material, is a question with no clean answer. If the people who built these structures were encoding a real event in the sky, something that happened once, catastrophically, and ended a phase of human civilization, then the promise at the end of Revelation isn't theology, it's geology, it's plasma physics. It's the sky doing what the sky has done before. And I still don't know whether that makes the ending more hopeful or more terrifying. I genuinely don't know, which means it's your turn. Not what you believe theologically. What do you think the text is actually describing? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see where this lands, because I have a feeling the comment section on this one is going to be more interesting than the video itself.